Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's begin today's comprehensive news analysis with the first news article, that is a comparison between the Green Revolution and the White Revolution. The author here, who is a former member of India's Planning Commission, says that while the Green Revolution has had a considerable number of negative impacts in the long run, such as soil degradation, such as lowering level of the underground water. On the other hand, the white revolution is still going strong and has had a long term impact on the small farmers that it has targeted. The green revolution, on one hand, can be regarded as a successful example of farmer transformation, but the reality is, decades after the green revolution, the farmers are still on the streets demanding higher prices for their produce and better policies from the government. Thus, the author here says that it is time that the government learns from its past mistakes and find out other ways to increase farmers' incomes rather than reintroducing the concept of green revolution. Just a couple of days back in the comprehensive news analysis, we had discussed about the life of Verghese Kurian, that is a person behind the idea of India's white revolution. On 26th of November, it was his 100th birth anniversary, which gives us a chance to look back at his contribution towards India's white revolution and where does it stand right now. The author here compares the two revolutions in how they were different from each other. While the green revolution mainly aimed to increase the farm output and prevent food shortages, white revolution was mainly focused on increasing the farmers' income and not really on increasing the milk production. Just that increasing milk production came as a byproduct of the single focus approach of increasing the income of the small farmers. While the Green Revolution focused on a lot of scientific methods, for example, the use of fertilizers was increased, high value seeds were introduced from abroad, chemicals and fertilizers became the norm and were given to the farmers in large numbers. On the other hand, White Revolution that focused on milk mainly had the farmer in mind rather than introducing scientific methods from across the world, which is what made the difference as per the author. While in Green Revolution, scientific inputs and scientific models were given priority over the others, in White Revolution it was the farmers who were at the end of the chain who were given all the preference. That is why the author says that the key to the success of white revolution or key to establishing of Amul as one of India's most loved brands was the equity factor that was followed by the organization, as in the farmers working on the ground were given the power to take the decisions rather than someone sitting at the top enforcing their decisions on the farmers. The author here says that we need to understand that increasing productivity is not always the end goal. That is, if I have to increase my productivity in an industry, one of the easiest ways to do that is to fire some workers. If, for example, 100 workers are producing stuff worth rupees 10 crores, and tomorrow, if I fire 10 of them and only 90 workers work, and they still produce 10 crore rupees of stuff, you might say that the productivity has increased. But that should not be the aim. The aim should be that we should have more farmers rather than 100, we should employ 1,000 farmers who should produce 1,000 crore worth of products. That would be the true meaning of increased productivity. Rather than replacing the people with machines or letting people go to increase per capita productivity, we should ensure that as many stakeholders as possible should individually earn more, as a result of which the company together will earn much more. This was the approach followed by Amul during the White Revolution, leading to its success. The IRMA, Institute of Rural Management Anand, which was set up by Dr. Verghese Kurian, recently convened a workshop on the occasion of his 100th birthday and pondered upon the takeaways from White Revolution. The article here tells us about these five takeaways. Number one, we should focus on equity, that is, work to increase a farmer's income and not the investor's return, the example that I gave you earlier. Second, focus on the social side of the enterprise. That is, rather than seeing top line approach about how much money is the company making, how much profit is the company making, also look at how many people is the company employing and per capita basis, is the lives of the people employed in the company getting any better or not? Third, the solutions to the problems must be local. That is, if India has a problem of shortage of milk or lack of nutrition, solution to those lies within the country and not bringing someone from outside. Fourth, science should be practical for the long run. For instance, with green revolution, the usage of fertilizers, high yield seeds are now showing negative impact in the long run. Fifth, aim for a steady change and not a drastic one. If you are seeking a solution to a problem that has lasted for hundreds of years, you can't expect the solution to be given to you within months. Be patient with the solutions and the result will be there to see, but you have to understand that drastic changes will not help anyone. While this is what the article tells us, it is also important for us to take a deeper look into the white revolution in India and the role played by Dr. Verghese Kurian, since we just observed the 100th birth anniversary of this great entrepreneur. India's White Revolution, or as you call it, Operation Flood, was his brainchild. He established institutions such as a National Dairy Development Board, which was the force behind the White Revolution. The White Revolution started in 1970s and was not an instant success. In fact, in the first phase from 1970 till 1980, India was earning money by selling butter oil and skimmed milk powder, which were donated to India by the European Union, which became a backbone of India's milk program. In the second phase from 1981 to 1985, India used the money that it had earned to increase the number of milk sheds, milk outlets, and build a self sustaining system. This was a time where multiple village cooperatives were set up and were told about the best practices to have milk production. The third phase from 1985 to 1996 saw the dairy cooperatives learning the best practices and helping direct dairy farmers in their own development, thus increasing the milk production in India and taking it to a much higher level. This is an example of how gradual changes are introduced. As a result of this, in 2016-17, India became the world's largest producer of milk, and this continues to be the case even today. India today makes up for 22% of milk's global production, all thanks to the White Revolution led by Dr. Verghese Kurian. The next article we will be discussing is about Delhi NCR's pollution control problem and the lessons that we can learn from China's strategy to avoid air pollution. As I have said earlier, also, this unfortunately has become an annual affair where petitions are filed in the Supreme Court in the months of November and December when the situation becomes extremely bad in Delhi NCR. The Supreme Court every year very angrily asks questions to the central government and the Delhi government where they give some excuses, and by the month of Jan and Feb, everything is forgotten. Yesterday, the Supreme Court again asked questions to the government, saying that despite reports saying that the government has taken all the steps, why is there no result on the ground? What exactly is a Commission for Air Quality Management doing in the NCR that was set up to control the air pollution problem? The central government, represented by the Solicitor General, said that we are thinking about restructuring the power structure of the Commission so that it can work in a better manner. This was one of the formal replies that you have to give to the court when you don't really have any concrete suggestion to offer. The author here says that the government must understand that the problem is not about any short term steps that can be taken. Rather, it is a problem of urban transformation. We don't just need to focus on the vehicles, we don't just need to focus on burning of fuel, we need to focus on people, their lifestyle, their services, how are we building our cities, and much more. The author here gives a lot of examples from Beijing and says that we can learn from this since Beijing and Delhi are comparable in multiple ways. For instance, both the cities have comparable population, and both the cities, in their fight against air pollution, have been focusing on pollutants such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, PM10, carbon monoxide, PM 2.5, and smog. Now, the author shares how exactly has Beijing improved its situation over the past decade or so. First, in case when there is a very heavy pollution forecasted in the coming days, An early warning is issued to the people at least 24 hours in advance all across the media so that the people can make efforts to stay indoors, and schools and colleges could be closed beforehand rather than letting the people suffer out in the open. We do have this kind of a technology that this can be turned into a reality very easily. Second, the author says that Beijing's approach towards urbanization has been much better as compared to Delhi. For example, in Beijing, a lot of space has been allocated to public transport. Beijing already has 550 kilometer of metro network as compared to Delhi, which has only about half of it. Not just this, Beijing in fact plans to double its length of the metro rail network. The bus transport system of Beijing is much more advanced. It has 8 times the number of buses as compared to Delhi Transport Corporation. In China, 72% of the travel is done by public transport as compared to 37% in Japan, 10% in US, 17% in Europe. In India, this number is extremely dismal. One of the other reasons is in India, traveling by your private vehicle is considered as a status symbol. That is why you see a lot of cars being driven with one single person driving the car. In many Western countries, what governments have done is if, for example, there is a 6 lane highway, out of these 6 lanes highways, only one lane can be utilized by a person who is driving the car alone. The other 5 lanes are open to those people where there are multiple people in the car. This is to encourage people to have multiple people in the car and not take out the car alone because you will only have 1/6 of the roads to travel. Beijing is also pushing towards electrification of vehicles. It plans to have 48 lakh charging points by 2022 to have a push towards electric vehicles. Delhi, on the other hand, has twice the number of registered vehicles in Beijing, but the number of electric vehicles and electric infrastructure is still much lower as compared to Beijing and other major cities around the world. Now, looking beyond the article, let's also see what exactly has the government been up to tackle the problem of air pollution in India. The government in 2019 launched the NCAP, that is the National Clean Air Program. It is an initiative with the goal of reducing the concentration of coarse and fine particulate matter by at least 20% by 2024. This is a joint initiative of multiple ministries, including the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Petroleum and Natural Gas, Heavy Industry, Health, Housing and Urban Affairs, Agriculture, the CPCB, and the Niti Aayog. However, not just the experts, even the government agencies themselves are not very happy with the implementation of NCAP. For instance, the NGT has asked the NCAP to make a number of changes in its approach. The NGT has directed that your goal of reducing air pollution by 20 to 30% is very low. Please increase your goal in order to become more effective. Secondly, we should try to move towards e vehicles and CNG vehicles as soon as possible. Not just this, we should also ensure that there is a proper AQI monitoring system in tier 2, tier 3 cities as well. For instance, we make a lot of fuss about the high AQI readings in Delhi NCR, when the reality is that there are some smaller cities in North India which would have a much worse AQI. Just that we don't have AQI measuring facilities in those cities. So the proposal is that we should have AQI measuring instruments in as many cities as possible within 6 months so that we can get a proper idea of the pollution levels. The next article is about the recently passed Assisted Reproductive Technology Regulation Bill 2020. The bill was just passed in the Lok Sabha on Wednesday and will now go to the Rajya Sabha. Although the bill has a lot of positive points, but the one reason why it has been in the news is because it does not include single men or the LGBTQ community under the bill. In simple terms, the bill tries to regulate the fertility treatment sector in India, which does not have a regulatory authority till now but has been flourishing over the past few years. Thus, a lot of illegal clinics have come up offering alternative reproductive techniques to the couples and have even led to exploitation of couples in large numbers. Now, the author says although introducing this bill is a pretty welcome step, but not including these two categories in the bill and not giving them the required safeguards is a step in the wrong direction. Even the expert committees had suggested that these two categories should also be made a part of the bill. But the government has said that live in couples, same sex couples, etc., will not be considered as a part of this bill since the Indian culture does not allow kids to be born outside the legal marriage system. Thus, it would not be in the best interest of the child to be born through assisted reproductive technology. Now, although this bill has just been passed, but it has been in the news for a long time. Let's go beyond the article and see the details of the bill. It was in 2008 that the bill was first discussed by the government in power. It was first drafted by ICMR, but not a lot of attention was given to the bill back then. Now, the current bill has the following important provisions. Number one, it proposes to set up a national registry and registration authority. Under this, all the clinics and medical professionals in this particular field will have to get themselves registered. Their registration will be valid for 5 years, and depending upon their performance, after 5 years, it may or may not be renewed. Second, a national board will be set up that will set minimum standards for physical infrastructure, laboratory, diagnostic equipment, and expert manpower to be employed at such clinics. The bill also talks about very stringent punishments for practicing sex selection or violating any other provision of this law. Any such clinic which offers sex selective ART will be punished by 5 to 10 years in jail and a fine of rupees 10 lakh to rupees 25 lakhs. The bill is said to be a step in the right direction since it will bring much more regulation in this field which has otherwise been flourishing in the past decade or so. There have also been other concerns about the bill. For example, discrimination. As I said, it doesn't apply to single men or unmarried couples. Second, there are also talks that it is a similar kind of a bill to the surrogacy bill. Both of these bills will set up multiple bodies for registration, and the clinics will have to get themselves registered multiple times. This will lead in duplication of effort and may lead to lack of regulation. Since it does not include a specific class of citizens such as single men, the LGBTQ community, it also violates Article 14 since it does not offer equality before law. The bill also should have included the maximum permitted cost of these procedures so that a large population could afford it, but the bill does not talk about that as well. The next article that we will be discussing is based on population control. It's actually an interview given in the Hindu newspaper today, which mainly focuses on the National Family Health Survey and its biggest headline, that is the total fertility rate of India coming down to 2.0 from 2.2. The gist of the article is who exactly is responsible for family planning in India? Is India on the right track or not? And since the total fertility rate of India has now reached 2.0, does it mean that our population will now start to decline? The authors here point out on a number of important facts. First, men have historically never been included in the concept of family planning, which is extremely wrong. All the onus has been put on women who don't really have a lot of say in their household in deciding how large the family should be. In fact, India on an average sees 1.64 crore abortions every single year, which points towards the fact that rather than using contraceptives at the first place, Indians have opted for abortions in large numbers, which has a much greater impact on the health of the women as compared to using contraceptives. This is a big indicator that it is the men in the family who are deciding the size of the family, and the women on whom the family planning programs have focused are not being given the kind of say that they deserve. However, since the total fertility rate of India has come down to 2, which is below the replacement fertility rate of 2.1, there are talks that our family planning policy may have been a success and we may be on the right track. But the authors say that it is not a very good indication as of now. Yes, it is a step in the right direction, but that does not mean that our population will start to decline just now. The authors say that the reason for a reduction in the total fertility rate is increase in the education levels. It has been seen that more the education in the society, lesser is the rate of fertility. Second, women desiring much lesser children, as has been the case earlier as well, but now with education, they are being more empowered. Third, sterilization rates amongst women are much higher as compared to male. All these factors have led to our total fertility rate declining at a good pace. However, we should not confuse fertility with population policy. The authors say that population policy has many more components than just fertility. It includes fertility, mortality, and migration. The government now has to focus on the other two. That is the rate of mortality, how can we reduce the number of avoidable deaths, and having a sound migration policy for the large scale domestic migration that takes place in India every single year. On the question of whether India's population will now start to decline, the authors here say that take an example of Kerala. Kerala has had a total fertility rate of 2 or less for over 30 years now. But if you see the population of Kerala, Kerala still has a positive population growth rate. So we must not assume that just by reaching total fertility rate of 2, our population will start to decline automatically in the coming years. The next question asked to the author is whether is it time to have a compulsory one or two child policy. The authors, however, argue against it. They say that states such as Kerala and Tamil Nadu have been able to achieve a total fertility rate of 2 much earlier as compared to the other states in India without any coercion or any strict policy. In fact, when you force a person not to do something, that is an indication that people will be pushed towards that. For example, in state of Bihar, when you ban alcohol, people will find a way to have it somehow and it will become a flourishing illegal industry. Similarly, rather than forcing the people to opt for one or two child policy, we should focus on methods of education, awareness, increasing their quality of life, and let them decide for themselves. Not just this, we also need to ensure that people have access to family planning initiatives. Younger girls, especially who are recently married, should have open access to family planning services so that they can avoid teenage pregnancy as much as possible. For that to happen, the government must take steps to keep the girls in schools and universities for a much longer time, develop their mind, and let them take decisions in the family. The other question raised in this interview was whether or not incentives should be given for family planning. The authors again argue against this incentive structure, saying that when women have more children than they are required to have, they would have to go for multiple abortions. That would again negatively impact their health. In fact, abortion related mortality is still close to 8%, which is extremely high. Thus, coming back to the original point, the onus of family planning should not just lie on the women. A family means men and women together. So, men should also be educated, should also be made aware that it is the women's body that has to bear the burden of bearing the child. So, the decision has to involve the women as well. The authors come back to the point that India often ignores the problem of internal migrants. There are close to 60 crore Indians who are not living at their original places now and have migrated to some other city or state in search of better jobs or opportunities. A proper migration policy for these people is as important as having a population policy in the country. That would help us reduce our mortality rate also and increase their quality of life. The authors also say that the family planning budget in India also is dismal. Of the total health budget, only 6% is a family planning budget. That also needs to increase so that more awareness programs can be run for people across the country of all age groups, especially the younger girls. Now, it is also a good time to see what initiatives has the government taken in the past few years to get our population under control. In 2019, Prime Minister Modi, during his Independence Day speech, appealed to the country that population control was a form of patriotism and people should take it up, thinking of it as their national duty. Not just this, in 2017, the government launched the Mission Parivar Vikas for increasing access to contraceptives and family planning services in 146 high fertility districts having a total fertility rate of 3 or above. In 2005, The National Family Planning Indemnity Scheme ensured the people in case of any death or complication when they go for sterilization to put the people's fear out of their mind if they're opting for sterilization. Not just this, in case of any loss of wages after conducting sterilization, the government has also offered compensation under the compensation scheme for sterilization acceptors since the year 2014. The family planning program in India has been running since 1952, making India the very first country in the world to launch such a major program. A lot of media platforms have been engaged in educating people about the need for family control. The famous slogan Hum Do, Hamare Do is still used in many government campaigns. In fact, some states have now adopted policies of not offering government jobs to those people who have more than two kids. However, these policies have not been found to be extremely helpful. The next small article from today's newspaper is about the need for increased vaccination rate in light of the risk from the Omicron variant of the coronavirus. As you know, the Omicron variant, which originated from South Africa, has now again sent the world into a tizzy, with a lot of countries banning flights from South Africa, Botswana, and other countries where the cases of these variants are being found. However, the reality is that these countries like Botswana and South Africa, who made public the information about this variant as soon as they found it, should be applauded rather than being punished. We saw what happened when China did not share information in the beginning with the entire world about the spread of coronavirus. These countries like South Africa, Botswana followed their duty and shared the genetic sequence of this variant as soon as possible. Thus, rather than imposing travel bans on these countries and hurting their economy, the nations across the world should appreciate their efforts and should help them in the vaccination drive so that the virus is controlled in these countries as soon as possible. Interestingly, this variant was found in other European countries even before it was found in South Africa. Countries such as Belgium, Germany, etc. saw this variant even before South Africa flagged it. But it was South Africa who brought it to the attention of the entire world, thus highlighting that their surveillance may be even better than the most advanced European countries in the world right now, and they should be applauded for the same. While the knee jerk reaction of most of the countries is to ban the flights from the affected nations, but this is not really a solution since the cases are already being found amongst those people who don't have a travel history. This variant is said to pose a very high global risk and has much higher infection rate as compared to the Delta variant, which impacted India during the second wave. Now, ever since the coronavirus pandemic has started, we have seen a lot of variants coming out, some being called the variants of concern, some being called the variants of interest. Let's have a look at them to revise once again which are the variants of concern. Right now, WHO has 5 variants of concern, that is, the Omicron, the Delta variant, Gamma, Beta, and Alpha. So, a variant in which there is an evidence of increase in transmissibility and more severe disease, significant reduction in the antibodies, those are termed by the WHO as the variants of concern. The latest one, as you can see, is the Omicron, while the Delta one emerged in India in late 2020. Not just this, there are also variants of interest. These are those variants that have been associated with changes to receptor binding, reduced neutralization of the antibodies generated, but are not as deadly as compared to the other variants which we just saw. Currently, as per the WHO, there are 2 variants of interest around the world. One, Mu, which originated in Colombia in early 2021, and second, Lambda, which emerged in Peru in the late 2020. These were the articles we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number 1. The answer to birth control lies in ensuring improved access to contraception and not in government imposed restrictions. Do you agree? Comment. Second, throw some light on the lessons that India can learn from China's fight against air pollution. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.